Okay, so we'll dive right into it. I'll share my screen and then we'll kind of go over some stuff. And then honestly, a lot of this time for office hours is going to be up to you guys, like whatever you all need. So if you need me to talk about some specific thing, you know, like about pipelines and sklearn, we can talk about that. If you want to talk about just like the overview of like the project or what you expect from next assessment, we can talk about that. Honestly, if you're like, hey, I really just want to talk about like job stuff, like I'm totally open for that too. Like really, these office hours, in my opinion, are kind of like whatever you all want, right? So this is kind of like overall schedule, but like feel free to interrupt me and go off on as many tangents as not necessary. I don't feel bad about that at all. Let me go ahead and share my screen and we will get started. And Zoom always throws my, Zoom throws all your windows like, or my window over there. So then I have to like look off to the side for you guys, but I like to see your guys' faces so I can see if you guys look confused and whatnot. All right, so basically this is just overall like what we're gonna go through today. You can see it's a relatively short agenda. Most of this review for Capstone stuff we talked about last time. So I think most people were here last time, right? If not, the recording's up there too. I can share that again in case you guys miss it. I'll put it like in this future in the recording description. I'll make sure to put that in there so you guys can find it as well. So we're gonna basically just review the Capstone project. So just a quick thumbs up. Who's already read like the README on Learn on what the Capstone project is? And it's okay if you haven't. I'm just kind of getting an idea if you had. No one has. Okay, maybe we'll look at that today. Maybe after we talk about advice and stuff like this. But I think it's probably important. I would say as much as possible, get your mind now focused on Capstone. Like now that especially you guys are all like done with mod 4, I know you guys aren't completely done with presenting and everything like that, but if you can switch your mind off to Capstone, the better. Okay. So we'll review the Capstone, talk about the goals of it. It's really quick. Timeline, talk about these timelines, and these are kind of like, these are just my dates for you guys. And really, these are like being really generous, like August 17th. I want you guys to be done with this way before then, because the sooner you get done with the different steps, the less likely you'll be stuck on something that's going to take a little bit longer. So that's kind of the idea. Then we'll talk about if you guys want a one-on-one, so I can do one-on-ones and stuff like that. We'll talk about what that process looks like. It's probably different from what Raphael had been doing. It's been different from what I've been doing, so I kind of guarantee that. Then we'll also talk about docs for questions, which you guys should all have access to. Then we'll go over question time, kind of open to whatever you guys want. There's already a couple things in there, so we can go over that. And then I'll have a little notebook about advice for projects. So this is one I talk about with all my students for not just Capstone, but just like mod projects in general. And honestly, projects just like even outside of Flatiron can be really useful. These are kind of like my personal advice. So like, again, like with everything, feel free to disagree with me. Like, I'm not going to be offended if you're like, oh, well, I don't think that's right. Or it's like, I prefer not to do it this way. Perfectly fine. These are just stuff that I find useful. All that. Okay. Any questions about this kind of agenda? Looking pretty good. All right. So let's get right into it. So let's review the Capstone project. So like I mentioned, we have our actual recording there. So I'll make sure to share that out with everyone. I'll put in this. It's weird to talk about like in the future. Like if this was a recording, in the description box, I guess. All right. Goals. So basically the main idea for your goal for your Capstone is to make a cool project, but really you're doing it for the job, right? You're really trying to do something that you can talk to a recruiter, can talk to an interviewer, all that good stuff. If this project also lands you some connection with people, and what I mean by that is like you have a really cool project that you share on, you know, social media or like LinkedIn and stuff like that, and people respond to you, which does happen quite frequently, like even better. But I would say the most, like, in my view, the Capstone for you guys and like what you should want from it is to have a good project that you can talk about and really just like show your knowledge on that. Like, hey, I really thought about this and I can apply data science concepts. Okay, cool. So that's the overall goal. Simple stuff, right? All right. So the timeline. So one thing I'll mention is make sure to follow some kind of framework like Crisp-VM, Awesome. How familiar are we with like either of these frameworks? These are the two main ones that I can't even think of the third one, to be quite honest. How familiar are we with either of these frameworks? I see kind of shake, kind of hand, nod. Okay, so this is where I would say it's not like imperative, being like you need to follow exactly Crisp-VM or Awesome, but I think it will also help you, how do I say this? Help guide you through the process so you don't get like what I say, like these little like rabbit holes where you like dig deeper, 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 and then you get stuck and like, oh shoot, I never like went past the, you know, the data cleaning process. There's always going to be more, no matter what kind of data you have, no matter what you end up doing, like you will always have more to do. And so it kind of helps you keep focused on making sure you have, at the very end of the day, something to show. Businesses, I mean, like when you're working in a business, that's going to be super important. Like basically saying, hey, like not digging deeper, 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 but like saying, hey, like, do we have at the end of the day, like something to show for it? There's always time and a place for like digging deeper, but knowing that time and place is not the capstone. It's definitely going to be the time where digging deep enough, having a good project. And then if you want to dig deeper too, just know that you always have more time in the future. But I don't want to have you guys work for 2-3 months, which students have had done. They get really into this project and they dig for like a lot longer than they should have. And then they realize afterwards, like, yeah, I probably could have ended this like in half the time. And like, yeah, like it's not a bad thing, but it does help you with time management. You guys have, I think I've shown you guys this diagram. Have you guys seen something like this diagram before? Yeah, okay. So it is a very general like data science lifecycle. Basically, CRISP-DM and Awesome, they're very similar and they're kind of this overall flow. There's a little more complexity with both of these frameworks, but the main idea is you got to start off with your question, right? You got to know what you're going to do before you do anything else. And then it says data mining. I like to call it data acquisition, right? Making sure you collect your data. What's it called? Like getting your data. And I say collect your data. In your guys' cases, it might be already aggregated, but just knowing where to find that data. And an important part here, I get students sometimes say like, oh, I found this data set. I'm like, have you downloaded it yet? And they go, so, no, I haven't downloaded it yet. I'm like, download it and like see what's in there first, because sometimes you might think you have something and then you download it, you're like, ooh, this is not quite what I expected, which is fine, but just know what's in there. So finding your data, acquiring it, whatever it means you have. Probably not web scraping, but if you are doing web scraping, please talk to me about that. I don't want you to do this whole thing of web scraping and then like 2 weeks later say, oh yeah, I'm still web scraping. I'm still trying to figure this out. Definitely talk to me if you're really interested in doing that. Okay, but anyway, data acquisition, and then going into kind of the data cleaning. This basically, I always mix data cleaning and data exploration kind of back and forth. There's not like a data cleaning and then exploration, right? It's kind of a little bit of both. You're going to go into your data, you're going to explore it, you're going to clean it up a little bit. And then as you think you're done, and then you do some more exploration, you're like, oh, I need to change some stuff up. You might go back to cleaning and such. But it's important that this part right here is done as quickly as possible, essentially diving right into your data and seeing what's there. And that's why this part right here, picking a problem, getting your data, and then just exploring it, is going to speed up the process a lot. You will always find that there's like not enough. Like you can always like say, oh, well, if I had this part of the data, or I can combine these data sources. Like just put a little timeline for yourself. I would say like at most a couple days to really, you know, take data, explore a little bit to see what data you want before you go and commit to it with the full exploration, data cleaning. And when I say exploration, it's like more like the EDA part of it, right? Of saying like, okay, I have the data, I kind of cleaned it up. Now let me explore what this data is all about. Okay, sound pretty good? All right. So just going over the timeline then that I mentioned from last time, your data sets are due August 17th, but really I want you kind of to be done with it at the, like, I really want you guys to be done with it by Friday, which is August 14th. But like, I'll say it's due for August 14th just because, or 17th, just to say it's due or something. What this means is that you chose your data set. That means you chose it, you figured out what your problem is, right? You shared it with me. You can either share it on the Slack channel and just kind of tag me, or you can share it directly with a DM. That's perfectly fine too. But basically, I just need to see what you have so I can just double check that like everything looks good. And it's not because like I don't think that you'll find the right data set. I just want to make sure we identify problems ahead of time in case there are some issues with the data set. And I won't, like, I'm not going to go, I'll be honest, I'm not going to do a full exploration of your data set, but I'll quickly look at it to see if it looks like a reasonable thing you can have for your problem. So choose your data set, which that means you have your problem too. You share what that problem is with me in the data set itself. If you're missing something, I'll just make sure to message you back. But tag me before August 17th, which is next Monday, but try to do it by Friday. And then this also includes, after you share it with me, I'll say, all right, looks good. Do a basic EDA. And what I mean by basically EDA is like at least load the data into Pandas. Can you actually load this data and actually work with it? It might sound really silly, like, oh, well, yeah, like it seems pretty easy. Like we've been doing this for a few months now. Like you can load data, but it's always helpful just to double check that like, hey, this is what I expect it to be. Because sometimes you get some weird things coming up. Okay. Sound pretty good? No questions? All right, cool. So, so you have now your data set, it's all set. You shared it with me. You did some basic EDA. My basic EDA is just basically load into a data frame, like could be as simple as a basic EDA. And now you're really talking about, okay, cleaning and exploring. I kind of say August 21st. So I believe that's a Friday if I have it remembered. So it's not this Friday, but would be the next Friday. That is kind of like, again, like the latest date I would say you to do it, right? Ideally, this should be done like, in my head, I'm like, okay, if I were you guys, where would I be done with the EDA? I would say before next Wednesday. So that means I chose my data set and I've done all the cleaning, all the exploration, getting ready for modeling by next Wednesday, earlier if possible. So if I'm like Monday, I'm like, cool. I think I got most of my EDA that I want to do. Awesome. This is where I think it's really important to set expectations of what you want to explore. Don't think you're going to explore everything. So coming up with 3 to maybe 4 questions specifically of like how this would be useful. Like, so you load up the data set, you have the business problem, and you think of like 3 to 4 questions of like, what do I want to make sure my stakeholders know about this data set, you know, or this, you know, problem? And those would be your focus on the EDA. Now, will you answer all 3 or 4 of those questions? Maybe not, right? But at the very least, it kind of gives you focus. So like if you start going in a tangent, you can say, well, that's an interesting thing, but I'm going to have to save that for a later time to explore. And that's where I think where a lot of people will get kind of like down those rabbit holes where they see something interesting and they really, really want to explore that, but it's not really related to what their original idea was. Now, if you really think that's a really interesting problem and you're like, oh, this is where the real meat is, and I think I have enough time to explore it, maybe that's an option. But I think it helps to kind of get an idea ahead of time before you even like really dig deep into that data. Okay. Any questions? Any like comments on this kind? And this is where I'll say, I'm not gonna necessarily check on you, like being like, oh, you need to turn in your EDA by this time, or you know, all that stuff. I might do like an overall kind of like consensus, like, hey, where's everyone at right now? You know, and if I haven't heard from you, maybe I'll message you out, say, hey, like, how are we doing with EDA? Like, are you moving on to model analysis? And we'll see where, you know, I'm just trying to guide you guys through because everyone works at their own pace. Okay. Cool. All right. Yeah, just a reminder, it's everything you need before modeling, but it doesn't have to be everything, right? There's always gonna be more to explore. There's always gonna be more to analyze. I say also share with me. When I say share, like, just let me know, like, hey, EDA's done. If you share anything you have, like, I honestly will take a quick look at it at the very least. Like, I don't have any problem with that. I actually would say even better, I think you should share your guys' projects with each other, like as you guys are working on that progress. It's useful to see what different people do. And honestly, you guys have been with each other probably for a few months now. Like, you guys kind of know each other a little bit more and probably can like give each other good advice. I'm sure you guys have already been doing this already, but it's good to reiterate. Okay. So now the last part, basically, it's like, okay, you have your EDA, you have your data all done, you know, you kind of are ready, you're down to your model, whatever that means, and then analysis, right? Your assessment needs, like, should be completed by September 4th. September 4th is your graduation date. Really plan on, like, at the very latest, starting your capstone assessment, like, on the 31st. Like, ideally, I know it's really quick, like, but, like, if you can at the very least kind of, like, say, hey, I think I'm ready or I'm close to being ready to, like, do my assessment. Hey, Victor, here's what I have right now. Can you just check it out to see what it looks good or like if I need to improve anything? I will be more than happy to do that. I would rather you guys message me ahead of time and show me something that's not complete versus having you guys set up like a capstone assessment and then on that day say, ooh, like you're really missing this part before we can really pass you through. And so just messaging me ahead of time is going to be super nice, like for you guys. Also makes my job easier too, because then I don't have to like, we don't have to go through a whole assessment and say, oh, like, you know, there's really these parts missing. Now you're gonna have to like really hustle up and like finish this part, right? Like before you can get passed through. The worst thing you can probably do, and I say worst, it's not really the worst, but what thing you can really do to really hurt you and stress you out is waiting until like literally the last day to do the assessment. Because then if something goes on, you know, like let's say you're missing something, now you have to hustle up, try to finish it so you can get it on time. And I don't want that for you guys. I want you guys to have a good project and good feedback from that project too. Okay, does that make sense to everyone? Cool. All right. Yeah. One thing I'm going to say is, and I don't know, different instructors do different things, but I become a little strict on this part. I'm pretty easygoing, except for this one aspect is I won't do an assessment with you until you have everything turned in on Learn. And the reason why is because I've done in the past where I've met with people who have like are missing a part. It's like, oh, like, well, I haven't done the recording or I haven't done this part of the technical book, but I think I'm ready for the assessment. And then we meet up and then like it takes them a week and a half later to get that last part and I can't pass them until then. I just think it helps where we really like if it's not turned in on Learn, then I'm not going to meet with the assessment. Does that seem fair to people? Like, okay, cool. And I think that helps you guys too, because then it doesn't also give you like, I'm going to put in this assessment and not actually have it completed. I want you guys, when you're done with your assessment, like I like to tell people right when, like at the end of the assessment, say, hey, you passed, you know, and you can be like all excited and everything like that, versus like saying, well, it looks good, but we'll have to wait until you get this last part. Like that's no fun. So that's why I like to try to do that way. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I need to mention about that. No, I think that sounds pretty solid. Oh, wrote that twice. Okay. So everything being the video recording, right? So just like every other projects, right? You have a video recording. It doesn't have to be something special. You don't have to worry about it being like, you're not going to edit it, right? You're not going to be a video editor. This is really just for art. Like, honestly, I don't know if you guys, it's mostly for our documentation to make sure that like, oh, like what the projects were. So basically like run through your project a couple times with your non-technical presentation, right? And then record that one time of their non-technical presentation. It should be less than 10 minutes. 10 minutes is kind of cutting on the long side. I know it's Capstone, so it might kind of go on the longer side, but past 10 minutes, you're like, you just try to fit too much in there. So it should be about 5 to 10 minutes. Sometimes I get people who get like really short, like 3 minutes. That's a little too much. That's a little too quick. So just that kind of gives you an idea and it also gets you ready before you actually do your technical or non-technical presentation during the assessment itself. Okay. Your blog post. So a link to your blog post. And this is where, again, I might be a little more strict in this way. I want that published somewhere, whether that means on LearnCo, whether that means on your personal blog, whether that means on LinkedIn, medium.com, whatever, right? I want to see like, where can I find this if I wasn't a Flatiron instructor? And so this, again, is kind of to encourage you guys to share your stuff, right? And so when someone sees your project, they can see where this blog post is or like learn about it and learn about how cool and awesome you are and how much you've done already. So that's my little thing. Technical notebooks, so just making sure that's probably the thing that's going to be usually complete, is that you have everything. Make sure you go through that rubric for the capstone, right? So it's pretty much the same rubric as we've been using for every project. So making sure you have all those pieces marked off. One part that people tend to forget, and I'm not really sure why, just because it feels like the most important part, the conclusion. Make sure you have a summary conclusion of like what this means, like whether it's like your results from your project, as well as like what this means for the stakeholders, like what they can use with this information, and then including like that future work. Like having just like, I think like between a paragraph and probably for Capstone, like about 3 paragraphs at the end of your like technical notebook of saying what you should conclude from this. That's just kind of expected for any data science notebook. Okay. And then of course your non-technical presentation, which is just a slideshow. So PDF format preferably. Some people use PowerPoint and such. I would prefer if you guys convert it to PDF because it's more universally. It's going to work on everyone's computer if you have a PDF. Okay. Cool. Sound all good so far? All right. Cool. So he's head nods, thumbs up. Awesome. Oh, and one last thing. When you graduate, this is the one that keeps people a lot. Make sure you have those 7 total blogs. So you should have the 4 blogs from the previous projects, the 5th blog for the capstone, and then 2 additional ones. You might have done one at the very beginning that was not associated with any project. You might have to think about that a little bit. And then like the 7th one is like an additional one. This is where I would say like, oh, like, what do I do? You can honestly take your other projects or something you've learned and focus on one technical aspect and talk about that. Talk about how to use, Pandas. I know Raphael is doing like dashboards, and maybe that's something you guys have kind of played around with. If you did something about dashboard, write a blog about dashboards and stuff. Say like, how, I think he uses Dash, right? I know he uses Plotly, right? Yeah, sound familiar? Okay. Whatever it is that you guys want to like kind of talk about in a technical aspect, That's perfectly fine. Okay, cool. This is the one that kind of keeps people probably the most. Yeah, and we'll talk more about that as you guys get closer. All right, so that's the timeline. Any questions about that capstone timeline, any of that process? Cool. All right, pretty much everything is really informal in the sense of like, oh, it's due, turn it into me or DM me. It's super informal. There's not like a specific checklist where I'm like, that goes up to headquarters and be like, oh, check off, except for the assessment part. So if that makes you feel less stressed, hopefully, that kind of helps things out. Most of the little deadline stuff is for you guys, for me to help you guys move along. So that way you make sure you don't get stuck in a place. Okay, cool. All right, so booking a one-on-one. So if you do want a one-on-one with me, like you want to do like questions, stuff like this, I have a little bit of a link, and I'll make sure to share this out too. So I'm actually in the process of adding this to your LearnCo homepage. I just got access to that today from Raphael. So I'm going to add this specifically on there, and I'll share it out with you guys. But one thing we're trying to doing, just because a lot of times people have the same capstone stuff, your one-on-ones can be up to 3 people. So let's say, for example, 3 of you guys have similar questions or like the same process or something like that, or just want to have like a one-on-one, but don't expect to use the whole 30 minutes, for example, and you just kind of want to quickly check in. You can basically, one hub, like schedule once, will allow you to schedule, or up to 3 people to schedule at the same time. And so the thing about that is like, well, okay, like the problem is schedule once doesn't really like showing like who has already signed up for it and stuff like this. So I made a little Google Doc here so you guys can see what, like, it basically should auto-populate whatever you enter in. It'll auto-populate like, who it is and then like the subject. So I'll kind of show you what that process looks like. But the idea here is that you can look at this Google Sheet right here and see maybe, like, oh, it looks like this person, it's like, oh, it looks like this person's talking about this thing they're in one-on-one. Maybe you message them, hey, you mind if I join with you on this one-on-one? Or like, hey, I'm going to join with you on this one-on-one. Book it, and then it shows up on that booking. So that way you get an idea of like, what's being talked about versus like signing up for a one-on-one and then finding out like someone's going to talk about something completely different. And you're like, oh, I feel weird about this or whatnot. I don't know. Does that make sense? Yeah. Now, if for the record, if you're like, I really need a one-on-one that's like just us because I don't know, let's say it's something personal or whatnot, feel free to message me. It's a little more involved process. This is the best way I could figure out how to do this. And this is kind of new for me, where we could have more than one person join in a one-on-one. And I just think that's going to be the easiest way for you guys to schedule through it. But if you're looking and say, hey, like I really want a personal one-on-one, just message me. Okay. So I'll walk you through this process. So you'll go to this link. Oops, this is going to mess me up. I open a new tab. There we go. So you go to this link and you'll see this guy right here. And you see a little description right here, blah, 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 right? Basically, you continue on this guy, and this will pull up my calendar, and you can basically select your times. I think you guys use schedule once already, right? No? Yeah? I see some nuts. Okay. No one seems too excited about it. So maybe you have, maybe you're like, I don't know, maybe way before. All right. So anyway, you just select your date, right? And I have it go up into 2 weeks. I would say try to avoid scheduling a one-on-one like 2 weeks in advance. If you have to, that's cool. But just because it tends things to change and stuff like that. And people are like, oh shoot, like I had one on Tuesday, but it turns out this thing came up. I'm gonna have to reschedule, and it just makes it more difficult. But also like maybe like when you schedule something at least the day before, that way also I can be ready for it's like, oh, there's someone is going up. Sometimes people will try to like do it like in the middle of the night and like for the next day, and I go up in the morning like, oh shoot, there's a one-on-one. It's like, I didn't know. So if there's something that comes up though, like last minute, just message me. Okay? But anyway, this will show you the available times. Let's say click on like 8 a.m. Oh, this is Pacific Standard Time. I'm in California, so that's why it's kind of weird timing, if you guys wondering. So note that this will be dependent on your time zone. But anyway, I'll say 8 a.m. and say subject, what's this meeting about? And say, oh, just say, hey, your name, right? So you can put just your first name, but if I have more students, it might help to put, I don't think anyone has the same name I'm seeing, but like you can put your last name, might be helpful. Put your email, that will basically, this won't be shared out with anyone, but you can basically like put your email in there, so then it'll send you like an invite. Like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the system, but like it'll send you an invite and stuff like that, and you can like cancel and stuff. If you do cancel, you have an option to do this on there, just message me too, just so it just keeps me, it's like, oh, did you accidentally cancel it? Or like, what's going on? Stuff like that. Just message me and whatnot. It makes me put it in twice. All right, so just spell it right. Okay, and then what lessons, so this is what lessons you've been covering. So this is just a template. So you can just say like, if you want to say like, oh, I've been doing like, and I want to talk about, I don't know, how to load a TSV. Okay, so like that's kind of the idea of what you would do, right? And so once you click done here, it'll kind of do a confirmation, but it will get added. It doesn't happen immediately, but pretty quickly. And basically this is what will get automatically added. At least cross your fingers, everything works out well. But it should show the time that was actually made for that study group, that person, so like who was the person who actually signed up, and then the notes is basically going to be, from this right, going to be the subject. No, this part right here. So you'll kind of see I click done here. It might take a while, so it might not come up right away. It's finalizing, sends me a confirmation email as well. And eventually this will get, okay, happened real quick. And you can see it automatically populated. So this way you can kind of quickly see what's going on, right? Now, you'll notice here is that you can only comment. So I made this so people can't accidentally delete thing by thing. But if you wanted to put a little comment here, maybe you, for example, you see someone talking about, ooh, like talking about that, I want to know about that too. Maybe you can put a comment. You can throw down a comment on there, and then that way I can see it. I don't know if anyone else will check this, but at least it'll kind of like give me a little idea, like people are having things going on. If you cancel it, I'll still have to manually delete this and stuff. But hopefully that gives you an idea of like who's being in like the meetings and stuff and what are being talked about. Okay. Does that make sense to people? Any questions on this process? Is this feeling like, give me a thumbs up and like for like, this sounds good, and thumbs down if it's like, this seems like complicated, like, okay, sounds pretty good, cool. If it gets complicated or if like you guys like, just message me, like I'm totally fine with that. All right, cool. All right, so that was booking. So now we have this doc for questions. So I shared this out last time, but basically just a place for you guys to like write down questions like as they happen. And this helps me too, because like if you put questions in there ahead of time, I can check it the day before, or like, you know, the morning before, or like the morning of, and just kind of see what's being asked, and I can maybe kind of put things together before, you know, we meet. I'm not an expert in everything for sure. So putting things ahead of time really helps me, so I can make sure like it's like whatever you guys need, I can like add it in there. Okay. So speaking of which, that means it's question time, right? So if I go to this Google Doc and I will open it and think of a new tab, so many questions. So quick thumbs up. You guys knew this existed, right? All right, I see thumbs up, so that's good. All right, so just advice for choosing a topic and data set. I think this was written actually from last time, but I didn't go over it. Well, I didn't address it specifically. And this is where like, if you put your name on here, it helps, because then I can say, oh, whoever asked this can do it, but you don't have to put your name. So advice for choosing a topic and data set. I think I mentioned this last time, but I'll just kind of repeat it, is if you know what industry you're gonna go into, that's likely the best option for you to do. However, it doesn't have to be. Even if you know what industry you're going into, choosing a topic that just is going to be interesting to you is going to be probably the best idea. I've had people do different kinds of things, like things that they were interested in, things that they just like wanted to try out, things that like one person really wanted to do much more image recognition when they go into the field. So they actually did one with I think they did it with traffic signs, if I remember this right. So they did like a convolutional neural net, and they kind of talked about that with activations and stuff like that. So that's the kind of idea. You can focus it on, like, I think sometimes people think of it like in the model terms of like, what kind of model should I build? Or really it should be like, what kind of problem it is. And then from that problem, how do I address this? You know, and some of it could be machine learning, deep learning stuff. Just kind of like, if you can kind of tune your mind a little bit in that direction. Because remember, your data science, as a job as a data scientist, is to provide inference, right? Or to provide, not only inference, insight on a specific like topic. Okay. Data sets, I think for the most part, so you guys went through Spark, right? PySpark and stuff like this, like from Mod 4. Yeah, that's the right answer, like about this, like kind of. I was gonna say is that I don't expect you guys to use Spark or PySpark. I don't expect you guys necessarily to use AWS or Google Cloud Platform or cloud stuff. that's partly because I feel like that's trying to make it something it doesn't have to be. Like, I'd rather have a project that is concise and when I'm saying I mean like as an interviewer, recruiter, I'd want to see a project that is concise and like thought of and like really like you can see that it's really thought of versus just trying to throw everything together to say, hey, look, I can do all these data science things, and it's like tangled up into this project mess of like, oh, look, there's random forests in here, and I don't know, I put some AWS in here, and what the heck, I made a dashboard, like, and it just seems like this mess and Frankenstein monster. That's not what you want. Your capstone, you want to say, all right, what's my problem? Here's the things I did to like address that problem, and here are my conclusions from that problem. That's really what you want from this capstone. Okay. So with data set stuff, don't choose really large data sets. And by really large data sets, I would say for you guys, definitely nothing more than 5 gigabytes. Like 5 gigabyte sized files might be too much. Just because then you'll probably have issues with running it on your own computer. Now, if you do want to do some of these things, for example, image recognition might be really cool, but you don't have a super powerful computer. There are ways to get around it, but it means that you're going to have to make sure you take that time to do that, whether that's AWS, Google Cloud Platform, and all that good stuff. Or my favorite is Google Cloud Colab. You guys know Google Colab? No, okay, cool. Yeah, Colab is just like I don't know, just amazing to my head. Like when I first found about this like a couple years ago, I was like, oh my gosh, like you can get a free GPU instance and just like run this in the cloud, and it's like, oh, I would take my phone and like run this. I'm like, this is awesome. So not that I should suggest you guys program on your phone. That's like the most worst experience ever. But anyway, your data set should be something that's no more than 5 gigabytes. If you do want to do something like relatively large, or you think it's large, or you think like, hey, I do want to do this, message me, right? And we can talk about what we can do. Your data set, I would say minimum like 25,000 data points. And just because like, if you don't have that many data points, it's just going to be more difficult for you to like get a really deep, like interesting project, especially if you want to do anything with deep learning. If you're planning to do anything with deep learning, because you're like, oh, like that's something I do want to show off a little bit, so I kind of want to gear towards that direction, I would say 100,000 data points is kind of like what you should go. You can do less. Like I would say probably the smallest for deep learning is like 50,000. There are some methods you can do. You guys have talked about unsupervised learning in like mod 3, right? Mod 3, mod 4. There are ways you can get more data that's unlabeled and stuff like this. But it just means it's more of a process and stuff like that. But it could be something that's really interesting. So this is why, like, if you're choosing your data set and you find something that's interesting that you don't think is quite, like, oh, it's not Victor approved, like pre-approved kind of deal, like perfectly fine. Like just message me, say, hey, I'm trying to do this. Like, what do you think? And maybe I can guide you. Either say, oh, I actually know another data set, which really rarely happens. Or it could be, oh, maybe you can do this thing. Or say, you know what, maybe do this instead, or you got to move on to a different one. But the main idea here is just try to get something that's relatively organized. I think I mentioned this before, Google data search, I can't remember what it's called, Google data set search. I always have to like literally Google it. You guys know what I'm talking about? This guy right here. Data search research.google.com. Yeah, it's a mouthful just for one URL. But this is, you guys have seen this before? Did I show this last time? Maybe I see a nod. I see some people go, maybe not. Okay, so for example, I show like bike data, or I'll just say bike. This is really nice because basically it's Google search for data sets. And so basically things get pulled up, like for example, this is the VTA about, looks like bike path lanes and routes. Like, oh, not what I was looking for, but maybe something interesting. This is a really quick way to find some quick data where you're just kind of like exploring and say, oh, what's out there right now? And so what's really cool too is I personally prefer a lot of stuff that's from Kaggle, not because the data sets are better, but just because like when I'm starting off, I'm like, oh, okay, like let me check this out. You can actually check it out on Kaggle. You guys are familiar with Kaggle.com? Okay, so Kaggle, right, they'll have like this data set source, and then usually they're kind of like, they've been really pushing towards like making really good data sets and like well documented. So usually we document it, it's all user generated and stuff like this, but usually it's all user generated by data scientists. So it's a little bit upper echelon than just some random person putting data on the web. And what's kind of nice is that you can also see notebooks and discussions and stuff, and you can see what other people have tried out. Not that I think that you should like copy these things, but like they're useful to see what other people have already explored and what issues people have come across. So that can be really useful to kind of like when you're doing your problem and like maybe you get stuck on something. And what's nice is that you can actually check out some of the data ahead of time too. So you can see here, I don't know if I have to be signed in. I don't think so. But you can see this one's like 4.5 gigs. Like this is probably fine because I probably won't have to use everything. Oh, I don't know, it's taking so long to run through. But it's probably because it's a SQLite. It has to decompile from the SQLite. But you can see very quickly, like it gives you a quick analysis of like what's in here. If people are really nice, they'll actually put descriptions in here and stuff like that, and you can see some data. So it's a really quick way to find data sources, but it's not the only way. You can see something similar right here. So it'll kind of give you the path. Sometimes it's not direct, or like you just kind of look at it. And in this case, actually, VTA does a pretty good job of actually showing information, but every site's going to be different. But I would say if you're like, I don't know where to find it, like check out this URL for sure. Like I just like searching this, even just for fun sometimes. It's just kind of interesting to find different data sets. Okay, cool. So that's my advice on choosing data sets. Any questions on this? Okay. No, we're pretty good. I don't know who asked it, so if you guys have more to expand on that, feel free to chime in. Okay. All right. So let's see how to ask for data from companies. So this is an interesting one. So sometimes there are data that are from companies. Now, if you're doing this for your capstone, I would say the biggest thing you can probably do that will kind of help you along is say, hi, I'm a student, and then kind of go from there. And usually people are pretty like, oh, like cool, a student is gonna use this data and check it out. I've had a student this year. I've had a couple students actually do this and like message the company, stuff like this. I will let you know is that it can take some time, right? Because like it might not be their priority, it might get lost in the inbox, and maybe they respond. I had one student literally messaged one out, took too long, took like 3 days. Like, you know what? I'm like, you got to find a different data set. I don't trust it. They finished their capstone, and then like the next day they literally emailed them and said, hey, we have this data set for you. So like that's the kind of thing you have to do when like you're getting stuff from companies and stuff like that, at least like from a direct person. Sometimes too, like they'll say, oh, it's actually already up on there. Like, you know, a lot of times if you are messaging not from a company, but like from a like government resource, those are actually really useful places because they basically are like literally meant to serve the public. So like they can kind of like message you a little quicker, where companies can be hit or miss. Sometimes they'll say, oh, here's a data that you can find. Note that sometimes there's just not going to be as complete too. So that's one issue. Now, that's kind of asking companies directly. I don't know if anyone wants to say who asked this question. Are they here today?
I did ask, but
yeah.
I mean, the time thing was I already thought that would be an issue, so I don't know.
Yeah, that'd probably be the biggest thing. I mean, you can go for it. Like if you already have an idea of like who you'd ask and what for, like message out. I will say is that it's good practice to see if you can find data without asking someone else, like as a data scientist, just because then you don't have to rely on someone else. If you are looking to go this route, I would say try to find a similar data set, like with the Google data search engine kind of deal or somewhere else. See if you can find that data and then also message that company and see if like what comes up. Because at worst, then company never responds to you, ghosts you completely, or takes too long to get information to you. You still have something that's related to that. And then best case scenario, you have some data set and then someone else, you know, you start doing your exploration and they say, oh, here's the data set, you know, and they say, oh, let me just apply this over or combine it with the data I already have. That's one option. I was going to go in the direction, like, I don't know if, like, now that I know it was you who asked it, another way I could interpret this question is like, how do you get data from like companies' websites? Like, if that makes sense, like, for example, let's say you wanted to get a bunch of LinkedIn data, but like LinkedIn's not going to really share that with you directly. This is where web scraping comes in. And like, I will tell you is like, depending, like it's definitely a gray area, right? Like, it's not going to be something where it's like cut and dry, like, oh, like, how do I say this? There are people who got in trouble for web scraping people's data, right? And in the current place it is right now, and I am not a lawyer, right? But in the current place that it is right now, it seems to be leaning towards the sense that like, yeah, if it's publicly available, yes, you can web scrape, you know, leaning towards the person who is the web scraper, like in a positive light. But just gotta be wary that like maybe don't scrape. Like if you find, I should be really clear about this. If you find something that you should not have access to, don't do that. Like, at least don't tell other people you did that, at the very least, because you can get in trouble for that, and that can be considered illegal and quite some issues. Even if they hey, they didn't password protect this, but they should have. Like, for example, if you happen to come across financial records with people's social security numbers from a company, don't do that. Maybe even like, oh, I would say the ethical thing to do would be to say to the company, hey, it looks like you have this exposed part. You should probably fix this. However, again, I am not a lawyer. People have gotten in trouble for doing that too. So I don't know, just be kind of wary of this. But also know certain data from companies, like for example, LinkedIn, Airbnb, they purposely try to make sure people don't web scrape their data. And so if you do try to go this route, like trying to pull data from a company's website, definitely talk to me first, just in case you're kind of thinking that direction, because you can come with some really big issues with just trying to technically do it, because LinkedIn and Airbnb try to change things up, and there's different stuff that can happen. But anyway, yeah, that hopefully addresses anything people are talking about when you say ask data from companies. I guess ask is kind of more like talking to someone versus just talking to a website. Okay. All right. Any other questions? I think that kind of addresses both of these ones, but any questions you guys thought of or wanted to ask real quick? Pretty good. Okay. Well, if you guys do have questions, we have this, like 4 times a week, right? So you can definitely throw your questions on here. All right. So that leads us to our last thing for today is advice for projects. So I mentioned before, I have the repo here for resources, right? And I think I put everything in projects. I have this general advice notebook right here that you guys can find. You guys know how to get, I think I shared this last time. Thumbs up, right? Maybe not. Oh, sure. So this is where I just put I put like, as an instructor, I just put all my, I say all my junk, but like really like all my my notebooks and stuff from classes and stuff, including this one. So if you go under projects, you can find some stuff about Capstone, like we talked about last time, as well as I'll probably add more stuff as we go through here, but also like general advice. So this is what my general advice I would give to students. There it is. I just gonna give to students as you guys are doing projects, but it's useful for a capstone too. And it's useful just to review, just because I haven't had you guys as a cohort. I don't know exactly expectations. So this could be helpful. This could be new to you. This could all be old news, but it's useful. So like I mentioned before, turn everything before like the actual assessment, right? Turn it in on Learn, right? That's pretty minor. Your notebook. So you guys already know what a notebook is. Again, this is kind of geared towards people like doing their first project, but you guys kind of get an idea. Just keep the data science lifecycle in mind. So I like this diagram right here because it's very like general and generic kind of stuff versus like specific awesome or crisp DM. But you should try to follow this as much as possible. If you don't follow this, that's fine. Like no one's gonna like come at you with a stick or whatever, but it does help you kind of organize, and it can be helpful to say, oh, I use crisp DM using this framework in this capstone. Like people like, ooh, look at you do a framework as a new data scientist. So impressing people, right? Keep the notebook clean and organized. So use Markdown, right? And explain what you're trying to achieve and investigate. This is one thing that I like am a big stickler on, is that like, I don't like comments in the code to explain why you're doing this thing for a data science reason. Does that make sense? Like comments in the code are really for the code, not for your data science process. Does that make that distinction make sense? Yeah. Okay. So Markdown is really saying like, I'm going to like investigate this part. Like you can organize it into different like cells like this, into different, sections. Basically you can explain, it's like, I want to investigate. It's like, oh, like, for example, let's say you have a graph and you see some weird like spike in your histogram. Like, oh, like there's this weird spike right here. You would use a Markdown that says, hey, like this looks like a really interesting spike and we should investigate this further. Or like, I think it might be these reasons. Like we'll check this out later. That's going to be super useful in the sense of like someone reading through. I like to say, oh, it's right here, but narratives, right? So a narrative is a really useful tool. You guys understand when I say a narrative, right? In like a notebook, it's kind of like you're telling a story. You're reading it from the top down and kind of logically going across things. Is that literally how you did your project? Probably not, right? Like there's going to be a whole bunch of back and forth, back and forth, and back and forth. And in my view, and again, this is where people differ. Some people use notebooks to basically just throw whatever you have, like code quickly and just like, who knows what junk is in here. people tend not to like that too much in data science. Like actually, a lot of people complain about data scientists for that exact reason. So my feeling is like, if you have that, keep that notebook that you have experiments on there, mess around with. But at the very end, at least have another notebook that kind of like organizes your thoughts into a logical process. Like it's kind of like when you tell a story to a kid and you go like what do you think's in that chest, you know, kind of like that kind of question. That's the kind of narrative I'm talking about. Like you're leading someone into the question that you already know the answer to, but you're kind of like getting them to think about it too. That's what I mean by that. And that's where Markdown does really well, to like it looks more like a story. Okay, makes sense. Cool. All right. Use functions. So don't repeat yourself. You guys should hopefully know this at this point. Write a function before write copy and pasting. If you're copy and pasting something, something's going on, right? If you're copy and pasting code over and over again, it means you should have a function or there's some other method to do this. Try to think in those terms. But make sure you document it. So make sure you use comments, doc strings. Again, some people say you shouldn't have any comments in code, like literally no comments in code. I'm not one of those people, but your comments can talk about what's going on in your code, of saying like, oh, why is this happening in the code? For example, if you go from like a list and you go from to -2, like why is it -2? That's a comment. Your doc string, you guys know doc strings, right? Yeah, so that's your function. I love doc strings. I think every time you write a function, you should have a doc string, even if it's for yourself, because when you come back to it later on, you forget what's going on. I've done this. I come back to code and I'm like, what did pass Victor do? I don't remember pass Victor doing this. So doc strings can help you, not just for other people understand your code, but for yourself too. Yeah, documentation. I'm going to keep saying that. Like, just make sure you explain what your code is. You don't need to say this is an if statement, because that's like silly. Like that just looks, I'll say it looks dumb. Like if you say this is an if statement, but if you say there's a reason why you're testing this or why you're testing this order, that's a comment. All right. I like to use comments to pseudocode. This is something that you guys might have already done, or like, again, you guys are in your last project, but I'll use code basically to like pseudocode. You guys know what pseudocode is? So it's kind of like coding up your stuff without literally writing code. It's kind of like saying quickly, like, oh, do a for loop over here or loop over this thing, right? You kind of get the concept, but you're not literally coding it. I'll use that basically to kind of map out what I'm doing. And I'll write comments first before actually like writing my code. And then I just fill in the code underneath it. So what's nice about this is, one, I already got documentation before I even got code, which is great, right? Two, is that it helps organize my thoughts where I don't get lost in my code. And then three is that like, I don't have to go back to it, which is, I think it's a big deal, especially if I want to document or check out what's going on. I can see what my plan of attack is beforehand. So I think this is a really useful kind of tool. Not everyone does this, including really experienced people, but I think it helps and might be helpful if you think in this way. Okay, cool. All right, conversation or not narratives, right? So narratives, good, right? I think, I don't know if I showed this picture, but basically you're, as a data scientist, you are explaining to other people of like insights about this problem, about this data set. The reader, so you should imagine when you write your notebook, someone who's relatively technical, like think like another person who's like halfway through the curriculum, should be able to read your like notebook and maybe not understand every aspect of it. Like for example, maybe they don't know what a neural network is, but they can understand your thought process and have those clear steps back and forth. This is where like, again, crisp DM or some framework can help you organize that stuff. And then having that markdown cells to explain what your thinking is. For example, a lot of people will like have like a graph and like, you know, a plot. And whenever you have a plot, I think like if you see something interesting, you should write that interesting thing out in Markdown. Like, hey, that's an interesting thing. We should explore this. And then the next part is you exploring it. What usually people will do is they'll have their graph, nothing underneath it, like no comments or whatnot, or in Markdown. And then they start doing something and it's clearly related to that graph, but it's not explicitly said. But during their technical note, like presentation, like with me, they'll kind of talk about it and you can see that they already know like the reasons why they did this, but it's not down in Markdown cell. So think of it like if you're not there, could someone understand your reasoning going through it? Okay, makes sense? Cool. All right, conversation with data-minded person. So this is more about the assessment itself. When you have this assessment, the technical part will be more of a technical kind of person. So data team member or manager, they're familiar with data. So they're familiar with data science, but maybe not with that data set. So it's gonna be much more of a conversation of like, you know, going back and forth. And that will help if you organize your stuff into kind of a logical step versus like trying to jump around different places might be hard to talk to someone. Again, these are things you probably guys already know. Okay, cool. I got 5 more minutes before I do have to head out. So we're gonna go through some of this stuff. Presentation, we can always go back to it too if you guys want. Presentation, so these are kind of like my advice kind of stuff. Take in account of your time, about 5 minutes. I think Capstone's gonna be a little bit longer, but 10 minutes, I would say over 10 minutes, I think you're going too long, right? You need to know your audience. Like if someone slots you in for a talk for less than 10 minutes and you go 15 minutes, then people aren't going to be super happy. It's going to be kind of frustrating for the person organizing it. Or they might just cut you off, which has happened to people I've seen. Not in this thing, but anyway, aim for that time, practice so you know how long it takes, right? Remember, you are the subject of the presentation, not the slides. I can't emphasize this enough, is that your slides are emphasizing your points, not being read by you. If you're reading your slides, what's the point of you being there, right? Like that's kind of the idea. And so your slides should really emphasize what you have. We can talk more about this for sure, because I think it's an important skill that is a separate skill. Biggest thing, like example, is this wall of text. Don't have a wall of text, right? This wall of text is going to basically be a thing that, like, the way I like to imagine this is like if you have a wall of text or too many bullet points even, and like you guys will do this too, like right now probably, is that while I'm talking, you're going to read everything else, right? Versus like listening to me. One solution to this, if you do have to have too many bullet points, like I say 3 to 4 is at most how many you have. You can have them appear one by one, kind of like when I showed you guys when I was doing this little slideshow kind of deal. You can have something where they appear one by one, and that kind of keeps it focused and you are in control of the conversation versus having other people kind of like look at stuff and not listen to you, which is fine, but now that you might miss something that is important for you to say. Because remember, your job as a data scientist is to give, hey, these are my insights, okay? Less is more, but make it meaningful. Don't give too much info, words, too much info with visualizations. So I am not a fan. I think you should never write a full sentence in a presentation unless it's a definition or something very important. Sentence fragments keeps people like basically kind of thinking it open. Some people are really good at this. They'll just literally have like a slide with a picture on it and just talk about it kind of deal. But you can have the same thing with visualizations. If your visualization is way too intense, way too in depth for a non-technical thing, people are just going to look at it and try to understand it, and they're not going to get the meaning out of it, right? You want to make sure it's digestible for that person or that audience. You can always make more slides. So people love to put, this is my favorite thing that people, actually my favorite, the thing I see a lot people do is they will make a slide with their graph and stuff like that. Awesome graph. And then they'll have right next to it bullet points about their graph. Awesome bullet points. The problem is I think that's too much. I personally think that's too much in one slide. I say, hey, either present the bullet points in one slide and the next slide, the visualization, or the visualization on one slide, no words, next slide, bullet points, summary of what's going on. So this is what you can do then with the visualization. You can say, oh, here's my visualization. You can talk it through the audience because you should talk through every visualization with your audience. Don't just say, oh, here's a picture. All right, next slide. Definitely talk about what are the interesting parts. So you have your visualization, you talk about it, right? And then the next slide, your bullet points of things you already talked about. Okay, that's the way I would suggest doing it. Too many times I think people like try to put the data in those bullet points together. I don't know, I think maybe people just get nervous about not having words on the page, but I think those should be separate if you can. Okay, cool. Let's see here. Consider your audience. So this is where I'll put this here, and I think we'll stop it here because I do have to head out in a second, but we can go over this if you guys would like for maybe next time. But non-tactical just means that they don't deal with that data, data scientists every day, right? So that's kind of the idea of like when you're having a non-technical person, you're explaining to them, preferably not with full data science terms. If you can use data science terms, but like explain yourself, define them at least so they can understand it. Analogies can be helpful. Really ask yourself, is it important to my audience? And this is kind of the biggest thing for data scientists. I think people go like, you realize it's a really cool thing as a data scientist, but like non-technical people, like say non-technical people who are not familiar with data science or at least in their everyday, don't really care like in the end of the day. And this has happened to me plenty of times. I'll give an example of this. Like I was coming up with like basically an equation essentially for people to determine, you know, like what kind of buckets different customers should be put in. And I spent so much time, I was like, oh, like this is an amazing equation. It was a piecewise function. It's like, oh, this is really awesome. And I made the mistake of showing that equation and like talking about it. And then like, I had like the summary of what it is, and then like no one understood the equation. No one cared. They were just, oh, it's put into segments. And I'm like, oh, I spent all that time talking about that equation. And I just felt so just like defeated because it was so important to me, but not my audience. So know what your audience is in that information. make sure you have actionable items, those items that should be done by the business. So you should say like recommendations. Your recommendation should be, this is what you should do based on my findings. Okay. And of course, 3 recommendations. I would say each recommendation should be on its own slide for emphasis. So that way you can talk about one recommendation and it stands out. One recommendation stands out. One recommendation stands out. You can then have a summary of all 3 together, but don't have all 3 together at once, because then it just becomes, it feels less important. It feels like more of a list and actually something they should do. Okay. More accurate data does not mean clear data. So one thing people do is like put every single data point on a slide, like, or on the visualization. That's not important, right? No one's going to look at every single slide, at least non-technical people, right? It might be more important to look more of a trend line or some summarization, or even just kind of like a general visualization that kind of summarizes most of the information. Okay, cool. And we can talk more about any of these parts. This is up on that repo, like I mentioned, for advice. But I do have to go. Kind of went through pretty quickly. We can talk about some other stuff, some advice. You can look through it. Maybe we'll talk about it next time. But before I go, are there any quick questions? Sound pretty good? All right, cool. So same time tomorrow, same link. I'll message you guys out. If you guys have any questions, message on Slack, DM me, right? I prefer if you guys have more of a general question, put on the Slack channel, because then everyone else can see too and might have the same question. Otherwise, you can always DM me. All right? All right, everyone. Well, take care. And I will see you tomorrow.